They said she couldn't be controlled, so they gave her away. The throne room smelled like heated metal and ozone, a low hum vibrating through the polished floor beneath Ethan Cole's boots as he stood alone, armor scratched, breathing steady, watching as the guards dragged her forward. She wasn't restrained the way prisoners usually were. No heavy chains, no restraints at all. Just distance, as if even they didn't trust getting too close. Her skin caught the violet light like shifting glass, blue and luminous. Her eyes sharp, alive, scanning, calculating. And when she moved, it was sudden enough to make every guard flinch without a single word being spoken. "Your reward," the general announced, voice echoing off the high crystalline walls, as if this moment had been rehearsed, as if this was honor. Ethan didn't step forward. He didn't reach for her. He just watched. The girl, Nixera, they called her, tilted her head, studying him the way a storm studies the horizon. Unpredictable, coiled with something deeper than anger, something closer to instinct. A guard made the mistake of stepping half a foot closer, and she reacted. Not violently, not recklessly, but with precision that made the entire room hold its breath. A shift, a warning, enough to remind everyone why she was here in the first place. Ethan exhaled slowly, rolling his shoulder as the quiet stretched, then finally spoke, voice low, grounded. "I didn't ask for a reward." And the general smiled like that was the point. "You earned it anyway," he replied, dismissing the room. With a flick of his hand, guards stepping back, distance widening, leaving Ethan and the alien girl alone in a silence that felt heavier than any weapon. She circled him once, not touching, just observing, her bare feet silent against the cold floor, her gaze never leaving his face, searching for something. Fear, control, intent, but finding none of it. Most would have tried to assert dominance, to claim, to prove something in front of an audience. But Ethan didn't move, didn't even tighten his stance, just let her look. "You're supposed to take me," she said at last, her voice smooth but edged, like something learned rather than felt. Ethan met her eyes without flinching. "That's not how this works." And something flickered across her expression. Confusion, brief and sharp, like a glitch in something deeper. The air shifted, subtle, almost invisible, but enough. "Then why are you here?" she asked, stepping closer now. Close enough that he could see the faint pulse of light beneath her skin, the rhythm of something not entirely human. Ethan paused, considering, then gave the simplest answer he had. "To leave," and turned away, not dramatic, not dismissive, just done. Behind him, Nixera didn't follow right away. She stood there, still, as if recalculating something she had never needed to before. Her world built on rules that suddenly didn't apply. Somewhere high above, the lights dimmed slightly as the chamber powered down for the next ceremony, but neither of them moved with it, because for the first time in a long time, she wasn't being claimed, and she didn't know what to do with that. The corridor outside the throne chamber was colder, the air thinner, humming with distant engines that pulsed through the station like a heartbeat Ethan Cole could feel in his bones as he walked without looking back, boots steady against the metal floor, every step measured, unhurried, as if nothing had changed. But behind him there was silence where there should have been pursuit. No guards, no orders, no chains dragging across the ground, just the faint, almost inaudible sound of someone choosing to follow. Nixera kept her distance at first, exactly 6 feet behind him, matching his pace with unnatural precision, her bare footsteps soundless, her eyes fixed on the back of his neck as if trying to understand the absence of fear there, the absence of ownership, because every other being she had encountered had reached for control the moment they could, had tried to define her, contain her, use her. But this human did none of it, and the lack of action felt louder than any command. The docking bay doors opened with a low mechanical hiss, revealing a wide hangar washed in white light, rows of ships resting like sleeping animals, fuel lines coiled, service drones gliding along tracks overhead, and Ethan headed straight for a mid-sized transport at the far end, its hull scratched from long travel, its engines still ticking from recent use. He tapped a control panel, and the ramp lowered, a soft hydraulic sigh breaking the quiet. And still he did not turn around. Nixera stopped at the base of the ramp, tilting her head slightly, studying the ship, then him, as if waiting for the moment when the rules would finally reveal themselves, when he would say the word that defined her place. But it never came. "You are leaving," she said, her voice cutting through the open space. Not a question, just an observation, and Ethan nodded once, stepping halfway up the ramp before glancing back just enough to meet her eyes. "Yes," he said simply, then added, "You are not required to come." And the statement hung there, heavier than any order she had ever received. Nixera's gaze sharpened. Something flickering beneath the surface, something uncertain, her fingers curling slightly at her sides as if resisting an instinct she could not fully name. Because not being required meant not being defined, and not being defined meant something far more dangerous than captivity. A service drone passed overhead, casting a moving shadow across her face, and for a moment she looked almost still, almost quiet, as if caught between two versions of herself, the one built to attach, to claim, to react, and the one that had no instructions for this. Ethan turned back toward the interior of the ship, stepping inside without waiting, the soft hum of the life support systems activating as the ramp lights flickered on, illuminating the narrow corridor ahead. But he did not close the ramp, did not seal the door, leaving the choice open in the most literal way possible. Seconds passed, stretching, measured only by the distant echo of machinery and the steady rhythm of his breathing as he moved through the cockpit, flipping switches, bringing systems online. And then, quietly, almost imperceptibly, another set of footsteps crossed the threshold. Nixera stepped onto the ramp, then into the ship, not rushing, not lunging, just walking, her movements controlled but no longer predatory, her eyes scanning the interior with the same intensity she had used in the throne room, but now searching for something else, something she did not yet understand. Ethan did not greet her, did not acknowledge the decision out loud. He simply reached for the controls, the engines beneath them beginning to warm with a low, rising hum that vibrated through the floor. And as the ramp slowly lifted behind her, sealing the outside world away, Nixera remained standing where she was, just inside the doorway, watching him, waiting for the next rule to reveal itself. But there was only silence, and in that silence, for the first time, she was not being taken anywhere. She was choosing to go. The ship lifted with a low, steady vibration, engines building from a quiet hum into a deep, resonant pulse that settled into the bones, the hangar lights sliding away beneath them as the transport eased forward into open space, stars stretching across the viewport like scattered glass. And Ethan Cole sat in the pilot's seat, one hand resting lightly on the controls, eyes forward, focused, as if this was just another departure, just another job, nothing unusual about the present standing. Silently behind him, Nixera did not move from the doorway at first, her gaze fixed on the shifting light beyond the hull, the vastness outside reflecting faintly in her eyes. But it was not the stars she was studying, it was him, the way he did not look back, did not check on her, did not assign her a place or a purpose, and the absence of instruction pressed against her mind like static. She stepped forward slowly, bare feet meeting the cool metal floor without sound, each movement deliberate, controlled, circling the edge of the cockpit without crossing into his space, testing invisible boundaries that had never been defined. "You should secure me," she said after a long silence, her voice even, almost clinical, as if reciting a known protocol, and Ethan adjusted a dial without looking at her, the engine output stabilizing as the ship cleared the station's gravity field. "You are not cargo," he replied, simple, final, and the words landed somewhere deeper than she expected. Nixera paused, her head tilting slightly, processing, because everything she had been taught categorized existence into roles, into ownership, into function, and without those, the structure collapsed into something uncertain. She moved closer, stopping just behind his shoulder now, close enough to feel the warmth of the systems around him, the steady rhythm of his breathing, and her eyes tracked every small motion, every adjustment of his hand on the controls, searching for intent. "Then what am I?" she asked, quieter this time, less certain, and Ethan leaned back slightly in the seat, considering, the stars reflecting faintly across his face. "You are someone on my ship," he said, then added, "and that is all you need to be right now." And the simplicity of it unsettled her more than any command could have. A soft alert chimed from The console, a proximity warning from the outer sensors, and Ethan reached forward, tapping the display, bringing up a map of nearby space. Small signals flickering at the edge of range, routine traffic, nothing immediate. But Nixera's posture changed subtly, her attention snapping to the screen, her instincts responding before thought could catch up. "They will track you," she said, her tone sharpening. A hint of something more familiar returning. "I am not something they release." And Ethan nodded once, not dismissing it, not reacting with urgency, just acknowledging the reality. "I know," he said, and adjusted their course by a few degrees, the ship banking smoothly as the stars shifted. She watched him carefully now, searching for tension, for fear, for any sign that he understood the weight of what he had taken on, but his movements remained steady, controlled, grounded in something she could not easily disrupt. "You should be concerned," she pressed, stepping closer, her presence filling the small space, and Ethan finally glanced at her, not sharply, not defensively, just meeting her gaze with the same calm he had carried since the throne room. "Concern does not change the situation," he said, and turned back to the controls. "It only changes how you handle it." And the answer lingered between them, not an argument, not a challenge, just a statement. Nixera's fingers curled slightly at her sides again, that same subtle tension building, but this time it was not directed outward, not at a threat or a target. It was internal, a friction between what she expected to feel and what was actually happening, because he was not trying to control her, and without that, her own responses had nowhere to anchor. She stepped back half a pace, creating space she did not need, but did not know how to fill, her eyes drifting briefly to the viewport, to the endless field of stars, then back to him. And for the first time since she had boarded the ship, her voice lost its edge entirely as she spoke. "This is inefficient." And Ethan allowed the faintest hint of a smile to touch the corner of his mouth, almost imperceptible. "It usually is," he replied, and the ship continued forward, carrying both of them into a direction neither of them fully understood yet. The ship settled into a steady cruise, the engine noise smoothing into a constant low vibration that blended with the faint hum of life support, and the cockpit lights dimmed slightly as the navigation system adjusted for long-range travel, casting soft shadows across the controls and the two figures occupying the small space. Ethan Cole remained in his seat, posture relaxed but alert, one hand resting near the console as data scrolled across the display in quiet streams of light, while behind him Nixera shifted again, not pacing, not circling, but unable to remain completely still, her movements smaller now, more contained, as if something inside her had lost its usual direction. She stopped near the side panel, fingers brushing lightly against the surface, feeling the faint warmth of the ship, the subtle vibration beneath it, her eyes narrowing slightly as she processed the unfamiliar environment, not as a threat, but as something she did not immediately understand how to interact with. "You have no containment protocols," she said after a moment, her tone measured, searching for structure. "No restraints, no assigned perimeter, no behavioral enforcement." And Ethan glanced briefly at a secondary screen, checking fuel levels. "Correct," he replied, not elaborating, not justifying, just stating. Nixera turned toward him fully now, her gaze more focused, more intent. "Then your system relies on trust," she continued, testing the word as if it were unstable. And Ethan leaned back slightly, exhaling. "It relies on choice," he said, and that word seemed to catch in the air between them. She took a step closer again, slower this time, her movements less reactive, more deliberate. "Choice creates unpredictability," she said, her voice lowering. "Unpredictability reduces efficiency." And Ethan allowed a small pause before answering. "Efficiency is not always the goal." And Nixera's expression shifted again, that same subtle fracture in her expectations widening. A soft chime sounded from the console, not urgent, just a status update, and Ethan reached forward, tapping through a sequence, adjusting their route slightly to avoid a cluster of drifting debris marked on the map. The ship responding with a gentle tilt that barely registered physically, but shifted the stars across the viewport in a slow, graceful arc. Nixera's eyes followed the movement, then returned to him, studying the way he interacted with the machine, not commanding it, not dominating it, but working with it in a way that felt balanced. You do not assert dominance over your vessel, she observed, and Ethan gave a faint shrug. It works better when I do not, he said, and the pattern was becoming harder for her to ignore. She moved closer to the front of the cockpit now, stepping into his peripheral space, her presence no longer sharp or invasive, but still intense, still searching. And you will apply the same logic to me, she said, not quite a question, and Ethan finally turned his head more fully, meeting her gaze with that same steady calm. I already have, he replied, the words settled into her, deeper this time, and for a moment she did not respond, her mind cycling through known frameworks, trying to place this interaction into something recognizable, something predictable, but every path ended the same way, unresolved. She looked away briefly, toward the stars again, her reflection faint in the glass, and for the first time it did not align cleanly with what she expected to see. Not a weapon, not a possession, not even a defined role, just herself, undefined. This structure is unstable, she said quietly, almost to herself, and Ethan returned his attention to the console, his voice just as calm. It is, he agreed, and then added, but it holds if you let it. And the idea lingered there, fragile but present, as the ship continued forward through the vast, quiet dark, carrying with it a system that should not have worked, and yet, somehow, was beginning to. The ship's internal lights shifted to a softer tone as the artificial night cycle engaged, the hum of the engines lowering to a quieter register that made the silence feel deeper, more intentional, and Ethan Cole stood from the pilot's seat without ceremony, stretching once before stepping away from the controls, leaving the navigation to run its steady course through open space. Nixera's eyes tracked him immediately, her focus sharpening as he moved out of the cockpit and into the narrow corridor beyond, her body reacting before thought could fully form, following at a measured distance, not stalking, not circling, but unable to remain apart, as if the absence of proximity created a pressure she did not yet understand. He entered a small galley area, the overhead lights warming slightly as he activated a panel, retrieving a simple ration pack and a container of water, movements efficient, practiced, familiar, and for a moment, the scene was almost ordinary. Almost human in a way that contrasted sharply with everything she had known. She stopped at the threshold, watching, her head tilting slightly as he opened the pack and began to eat without urgency, without guarding his space, without even acknowledging her presence as something that required control. You are exposed, she said after a moment, her voice low but precise. You have not secured the perimeter, and your attention is divided. And Ethan glanced up briefly, not defensive, just aware. There is no immediate threat, he replied, taking another bite, and I am allowed to eat. And the simplicity of the statement unsettled her again, because it implied a freedom of action she had never been designed to account for. She stepped into the room slowly, the faint vibration of the ship passing through the floor into her bare feet, grounding her in a space that still felt undefined, her gaze moving between him and the surroundings, cataloging exits, angles, variables, and yet none of. It resolved into a clear directive. Your lack of precaution is inefficient, she pressed, stepping closer, her presence filling the small space with a quiet intensity, and Ethan set the ration pack down for a moment, meeting her eyes directly. And yet I am still here, he said, not as a challenge, but as a fact, and something in that answer disrupted her pattern again. She moved closer still, stopping just within arm's reach now, her eyes searching his face for any sign of contradiction, any hidden layer of control or manipulation, but finding none. Only that same steady calm that did not react to her proximity the way others always had. You should define my role, she said, her voice quieter now, less sharp. Without a role, I cannot optimize my function. And Ethan considered that for a moment, then reached for the water container, taking a slow drink before answering. You do not need to optimize anything, he said. You can just exist, and the word lingered, unfamiliar in its application. Nixera's fingers curled slightly again, that same internal tension rising, but now it was accompanied by something else, something less precise, less controlled, a flicker of uncertainty that did not resolve into action. She looked down briefly, her reflection faint in the polished surface of the panel beside them, then back at him. "Existence without purpose is unstable," she said, almost quietly, and Ethan gave a small nod, acknowledging the truth of it without correcting it. "It can be," he agreed, "but it can also change," and he picked up the ration pack again, continuing as if the conversation did not require a conclusion. Nixera remained where she was, not retreating, not advancing, her gaze fixed on him as he resumed something so ordinary it felt alien to her in a different way. And for the first time, the tension in her posture did not build toward a reaction, did not sharpen into control or aggression. It simply lingered, unresolved, as the ship carried them forward through the quiet dark, and she stood there, not assigned, not commanded, just present, trying to understand what that meant. The silence did not stay quiet for long, a soft but persistent tone breaking through the hum of the ship as a warning indicator blinked to life somewhere deeper in the system, not urgent, but insistent, and Ethan Cole set the ration pack aside without rushing, standing as the sound repeated in a steady rhythm that suggested something approaching rather than something failing. Nixera reacted instantly, her posture tightening, her attention snapping toward the source of the signal before Ethan even moved, her instincts aligning with something familiar again, something structured, and she followed him back toward the cockpit without hesitation this time. No distance, no pause, just direct movement. The main display flickered as Ethan brought it into full view, a cluster of faint signals appearing at the edge of the sensor range, not large, not aggressive, but consistent, maintaining distance while matching trajectory. And he studied it for a moment in silence, one hand resting lightly against the console. "They found you," Nixera said, her voice steady but carrying a subtle shift, a return of clarity, and Ethan nodded once, not surprised. "They were always going to," he replied, adjusting the scan resolution, the shapes on the display sharpening slightly, still distant, still cautious. Nixera stepped closer to the screen, her eyes narrowing as she processed the pattern, the formation, the spacing, every detail feeding into a framework she understood. "They are not attacking," she observed. "They are waiting," and Ethan leaned back slightly, considering that. "Then we do not give them a reason to change that," he said, his tone unchanged, measured, grounded. She turned toward him sharply at that, a flicker of something more intense returning to her expression. "You are underestimating them," she said. "They will escalate when they determine your behavior is non-compliant." And Ethan met her gaze calmly. "Then we stay ahead of that determination," he replied, and the answer, once again, did not align with the expected response. Nixera's fingers curled slightly at her sides, that familiar tension building. But now it had direction again, now it had context, and yet something about his lack of urgency disrupted even that, because he was not reacting the way a target should react, not accelerating, not evading aggressively, not preparing for confrontation, just adjusting, adapting, maintaining control of his own pace. "You should increase speed," she said, stepping closer, her voice more focused now, more certain, "or alter course unpredictably to disrupt their tracking." And Ethan glanced at the engine output, then back to the display. "That would confirm we see them as a threat," he said. "And right now, they are still deciding what we are." And Nixera paused, processing that, because it reframed the situation in a way that did not rely on dominance or submission, but on perception. She looked back at the display, then at him, her voice lowering slightly. "You are manipulating their expectations," she said, and Ethan gave a small nod. "I am not giving them one," he corrected, and the distinction settled into her mind with unexpected weight. The ship continued forward, steady, unchanged, the signals maintaining their distance, neither closing in nor falling back, and the space between action and inaction stretched into something fragile, something balanced. Nixera remained beside him now, no longer hovering at the edges, her focus shifting between the display and his movements, trying to map his decisions into something coherent, something repeatable, but each choice seemed to resist categorization. "If they approach closer," she said after a moment, her tone quieter now, less directive, "what will you do?" And Ethan did not answer immediately, his eyes on the stars beyond the display, the faint reflection of the distant signals barely visible in the glass. I will decide when it happens, he said at last, and Nixera's gaze lingered on him. The answer both insufficient and strangely stabilizing at the same time. The warning tone faded as the system adjusted to the new parameters, the alert no longer escalating, just monitoring, and in the quiet that followed, Nixera did not step away, did not retreat into distance or tension. She remained there, close enough to share the space, her presence no longer pressing for control, but not entirely at ease either, suspended between what she had been and what she might become, as the ship moved forward with quiet defiance against expectations that had not yet been fully revealed. The distance between the signals began to change, not dramatically, not enough to trigger alarms, but enough for the pattern to shift, a subtle tightening that registered first in Nixera's posture before it appeared clearly on the display, her eyes narrowing as the faint points of light edged closer along a calculated arc. They are adjusting, she said quietly, her voice carrying a new tension, not sharp, not reactive, but aware. And Ethan Cole did not move immediately, his gaze steady on the stars ahead as if the information had already been accounted for. The ship continued forward at the same speed, the same heading, no sudden maneuvers, no visible reaction, and that lack of change seemed to disturb her more than the movement on the screen. You should respond, she pressed, stepping closer to the console, her reflection merging with the display as the incoming signals refined their trajectory. They are narrowing the range to test your threshold, and Ethan finally reached forward, not to accelerate, not to evade, but to dim the display slightly, reducing its brightness so the stars beyond became clearer, more defined. And if I react to every test, he said calmly, then I teach them exactly where that threshold is. And the logic settled into the space between them with quiet weight. Nixera's fingers tightened briefly against the edge of the console, the material giving a soft, almost imperceptible response under her grip, and she forced herself to release it, to step back half a pace, recalibrating, because his approach did not fit the model she had been built around. They will continue, she said, her voice lower now, less directive, until they find a reaction, and Ethan nodded once. Then we let them look, he replied, and turned slightly in his seat, not fully facing her, but enough to acknowledge her presence without centering it. The ship's systems hummed steadily, the life support maintaining its quiet rhythm, the engine output unchanged, and the approaching signals held their new distance, no longer drifting aimlessly, but not yet committing to anything more. Nixera watched the display, then him, then the empty space beyond, her mind moving through scenarios, projections, outcomes, but each one required a response he was not giving. And without that input, the predictions began to lose their clarity. You are removing variables, she said after a moment, the realization forming slowly, not adding them. And Ethan allowed a faint shift in his expression, not quite a smile, but something close. It keeps things simpler, he said, and simplicity, in this context, felt almost foreign. A soft vibration passed through the floor as the ship adjusted its internal balance, minor corrections compensating for external drift, and Nixera's attention flickered downward for a fraction of a second before returning to the display, her instincts still active, still precise, but no longer dominating every decision. If they close further, she said, quieter now, almost reflective, they will expect resistance. And Ethan leaned back slightly, his eyes returning to the stars. Then we give them something else to think about, he replied, and the answer, once again, did not resolve into a clear action. Nixera studied him in silence, the tension in her posture no longer sharp, no longer immediate, but still present, still unresolved, and for the first time, it was not driving her forward into reaction. It was holding her in place, forcing her to observe, to wait. The signals held their position, the invisible line between pursuit and engagement stretching thinner with each passing second, and the ship continued forward without deviation, a steady presence against a shifting field of intent. Nixera exhaled slowly, the sound barely audible over the hum of the systems, and stepped closer again, not out of instinct this time, but by choice, her position aligning beside him rather than behind, her gaze moving from the display to the open expanse ahead, where the stars remained unchanged despite everything else. This is unstable, she said softly, not as a warning, but as a recognition, and Ethan nodded without looking at her. It always is, he said, and for a moment, neither of them spoke again. The quiet stretching not with tension, but with something more fragile, something that held even as the unknown moved closer, waiting to see which of them would define what came next. The line between distance and contact finally shifted, not with speed, not with force, but with intent, the distant signals tightening their formation into something unmistakable now, no longer observing, no longer testing, but deciding, and the console reflected it in a quiet change of color, a subtle shift from passive tracking to active classification. Nixera saw it instantly, her entire posture aligning with the change, her focus sharpening into something precise, something almost familiar, and for a moment it looked like the version of her that had been built. For control had returned. They have chosen, she said, her voice low and certain, and Ethan Cole did not reach for the controls, did not alter their speed, did not even lean forward. He simply watched the display for a second longer before his gaze drifted back to the stars beyond, as if the decision out there did not yet require one in here. Then we answer, he said calmly. And the simplicity of that response made Nixera turn toward him sharply, because it did not match escalation, it did not match defense, it did not match anything she had been trained to expect. Answer with what? She asked, stepping closer, the faint glow beneath her skin pulsing slightly with the shift in her internal state, and Ethan reached out, not to engage weapons or shields, but to adjust the external comm array, a soft tone confirming the channel was open, the ship broadcasting a signal into the quiet dark. Nixera froze, her eyes flicking to the console, then back to him, confusion breaking through. The precision of her instincts. You are revealing your position, she said, and for the first time there was something almost uncertain in her voice. You are inviting engagement. And Ethan nodded once, not denying it. I am removing doubt, he replied, and the transmission continued, a steady pulse of data moving outward, simple, unthreatening, impossible to misinterpret as aggression. The approaching signals slowed, not stopping, but shifting again, their formation loosening slightly as if recalculating in response to something unexpected, something that did not fit their model, and Nixera watched it happen in real time, her mind racing to reconcile the outcome with the input. They are hesitating, she said, almost under her breath, and Ethan allowed a faint exhale, not relief, not victory, just acknowledgement. People do that when they do not understand what they are looking at, he said. And the word people lingered in the air, broadening the definition beyond species, beyond structure. Nixera stepped back half a pace, her eyes moving between the display and the open channel indicator, her internal patterns searching for alignment. But each conclusion led to the same place, undefined. You are not resisting, she said slowly. You are not submitting. And Ethan's voice remained steady. I am choosing neither, he said. And the answer landed with a weight that was difficult to ignore. The signals held their new distance, no longer closing, no longer pressing, suspended in a state of uncertainty that mirrored her own. And the ship remained exactly where it was meant to be, not accelerating, not retreating, just present. Nixera's fingers relaxed at her sides, the tension that had defined her reaction since the throne room loosening in a way that felt unfamiliar, not gone, but no longer directing every movement. And she looked at him again, not searching for control this time, not measuring threat, but trying to understand something deeper, something that did not rely on dominance or hierarchy. This is inefficient, she said quietly, but the edge was gone from the words, replaced by something closer to curiosity, and Ethan gave the smallest hint of a smile. It usually is, he replied, and outside the ship, the unknown lingered, not advancing, not retreating, waiting, just like her, for a decision that no longer followed the rules it was built to expect. The silence held, not empty but full, stretched between the ship and the distant formation that no longer advanced, no longer pressed, just remained suspended in a decision it could not complete, and inside the cockpit the systems returned to their steady rhythm, the soft hum of the engines grounding the moment as if nothing had changed, even though everything had. Nixera stood beside Ethan Cole, not behind him, not circling, just there, Her posture no longer coiled with instinct, her hands relaxed at her sides, her gaze shifting between the display and the open expanse beyond, where the stars burned quietly, indifferent to the tension that had just dissolved. "They are disengaging," she said after a long moment, her voice softer now, not edged with certainty, but shaped by observation, and the signals on the console confirmed it, their formation loosening further, drifting outward in slow arcs that signaled withdrawal without retreat, as if they were choosing distance, rather than being forced into it. Ethan nodded once, reaching forward to close the open channel, the soft tone of the system confirming the transmission had ended, and the cockpit grew quieter, the absence of that outgoing signal leaving only the natural sounds of the ship. "They decided they had enough information," he said, not looking at the display anymore, his attention returning to the path ahead, and Nyxera studied him, searching for the moment where control would reassert itself, where he would claim success or define the outcome. But it did not come. "You altered their behavior without force," she said slowly, as if testing the shape of the idea, and Ethan gave a small, almost absent nod. "Sometimes not forcing a decision is what changes it," he replied, and the words settled into her with a weight that did not immediately resolve. She looked back at the fading signals, their presence diminishing against the vast field of stars until they became indistinguishable from everything else, just light in the distance, no longer focused, no longer directed. And for the first time since she had been brought into that throne room, there was no external pressure shaping her response, no immediate threat, no command, no structure demanding action. She turned back to him, her eyes searching his face again, but not for weakness, not for control, just for understanding. And when she spoke, her voice was different, quieter, less certain. "You did not claim me," she said. And the statement carried more than observation now. It carried recognition. Ethan leaned back slightly in the pilot's seat, his expression calm, unchanged. "I told you," he said. "I do not own people." And the words no longer felt like a contradiction to her. They felt like a foundation she had not known existed. Nyxera looked down briefly, her reflection faint in the dark surface of the console. The glow beneath her skin softer now, less reactive, more steady. And when she looked up again, there was no demand in her gaze, no instinct pressing forward, just a question she had never been built to ask. "Then why did you take me?" she said, and Ethan was quiet for a moment, not avoiding the answer, just choosing it carefully. "I did not take you," he said at last, his voice steady. "You walked onto the ship, and the truth of it settled between them with a clarity that cut through everything else." Nyxera stood there, still, the meaning unfolding slowly, not as a command, not as a rule, but as something far more unstable, far more open. And for the first time, her next step did not come from instinct, did not come from programming. It came from that space he had left for her. She moved then, not circling, not testing, just stepping forward until she stood beside him fully, her gaze shifting to the stars ahead, matching his line of sight. Her presence no longer defined by proximity or control, but by choice. The ship continued forward, engine steady, course unchanged, and in the reflection of the viewport, two figures stood side by side, not bound, not claimed, just there, moving through the quiet dark together, and for the first time, that was enough.